world had ceased its worlding and had crystallized out as a solid and homogeneous precipitate, awaiting its differentiation through the superimposition of cultural form. In such a stable and stabilized world, nothing flows. There can be no wind or weather, no rain to moisten the land or rivers running through it, no rising up of the earth into plant or animal, indeed, no life at all. There could be no things, only objects. So in their attempts to rebalance the hylomorphic model, theorists have insisted that the material world is not passively subservient to human designs. And yet, having arrested the flow of materials, they can only comprehend activity on the side of the material world by attributing agency to objects. Pollard, however, sounds a note of dissent, and concluding an important article on the art of decay and the transformation of substance, he points out that material things, like people, are processes, and that their real agency lies precisely in the fact that they cannot always be captured and contained. As we found, it's in the opposite of capture and containment, namely in discharge and leakage, that we discover the life of things. So bearing this in mind, we can return to Deleuze and Guattari, who insist that whenever we encounter matter, it is matter in movement, in flux, in variation. And the consequence, they go on to suggest, is that this matter flow can only be followed. Now, what Deleuze and Guattari have called matter flow, I call material. And accordingly, I recast their suggestion as a simple rule of thumb to follow the materials. The EWO, the environment without objects, I contend, is not a material world, but a world of materials, of matter in flux. And to follow these materials is to enter into a world that is, so to speak, continually on the boil. Indeed, rather than comparing it, as students of material culture often do, to a giant museum or a department store in which objects are arrayed according to their attributes or provenance, it might be more helpful to imagine the world as a huge kitchen, well stocked with ingredients of all sorts. In the kitchen, stuff is mixed together in various combinations, generating new materials in the process, which will in turn become mixed with other ingredients in an endless process of transformation. To cook, containers have to be opened and their contents poured out. We have to take the lids off things. Faced with the anarchic proclivities of materials, the cook has indeed to struggle to retain some semblance of control over what is going on in the kitchen. Perhaps an even better parallel might be drawn with the laboratory of the alchemist. The world, according to alchemy, as art historian James Elkins explains, was not one of matter that might be described according to the principles of science in terms of its atomic or molecular composition, but of substances which were known by what they look and feel like, and by following what happens to them if they are mixed together, heated or cooled. Oils, for example, for alchemy, were not hydrocarbons, but, I quote, what rose to the surface of a pot of stewing plants or sat dark and fetid at the bottom of a pit of rotting horseflesh. Alchemy, in Elkins's words, is the old science of struggling with materials and not quite understanding what is happening. And his point is that this too is what painters do in their everyday work in the studio. Their knowledge was also one of substances, and these were often little different from those of the alchemical laboratory. Painters' size, the glue they used, for example, was made from horses' hooves, stags' antlers, and rabbit skin, and paint has been mixed with beeswax, the milk of figs, and the resins of exotic plants. Pigments were obtained from a bizarre miscellany of ingredients, such as the small reddish insects that were boiled and dried in the sun to produce the deep red pigment known as carmine, or the vinegar and horse manure that was mixed with lead in clay pots to produce the best quality white paint. So as practitioners in the EWO, the cook, the alchemist, and the painter are in the business not so much of imposing form on matter as of bringing together diverse materials and combining or redirecting their flow in the anticipation of what might emerge. The same could be said of the potter, as Benjamin Alberti suggests in a fine study of ceramics from northwest Argentina dating from the first millennium AD. It would be a mistake, Alberti argues, to assume that the pot is a fixed and stable object bearing the imprint of cultural form upon the obdurate matter of the physical world. On the contrary, evidence suggests that pots were treated like human bodies and with the same concern, namely to compensate for chronic instability, to shore up vessels for life against their ever-present susceptibility to leakage and discharge that threatens their dissolution and metamorphosis. As parts of the fabric of the EWO, pots are no more stable than bodies are, but are constituted and held in place within flows of materials. But left to themselves, materials can run amok. Pots are smashed, bodies disintegrate. It takes effort and vigilance to keep things intact, whether they be pots or people. And the same, of course, is true of the gardener, who likewise has to struggle to prevent the garden from turning into a jungle. Now, modern society, of course, is averse to such chaos. Yet, however much it has tried through feats of engineering to construct a material world that matches its expectations, that is, a world of discrete, well-ordered and well-behaved objects, its aspirations are constantly confounded by life's refusal to be contained. We might think that objects have outer surfaces, but wherever there are surfaces, life depends on the continual exchange of materials across them. If by surfacing the earth or incarcerating bodies we block that exchange, then nothing can live. In practice, however, such blockages can never be more than provisional. The hard surfacing of the earth, for example, is perhaps the most salient characteristic of what we conventionally call the built environment. On a paved road or concrete foundation, nothing can grow unless provisioned from remote sources. Yet even the most resistant of materials, even concrete or asphalt, cannot forever withstand the effects of erosion and wear and tear. So the paved surface, attacked by roots from below and by the action of wind, rain, and frost from above, eventually cracks and crumbles, allowing plant growth through to mingle and bind once again with the light, air, and moisture of the atmosphere. And wherever we choose to look, even in the center of a city, the active materials of life are winning out over the dead hand of materiality that would fain snuff it out. So by restoring things to life, I've wanted to celebrate the creativity of what Clay called form giving. But it's important to be precise about what I mean by creativity. And specifically, I'm concerned to reverse a tendency, which I think is evident in much of the literature on art and material culture, to read creativity backwards, starting from an outcome in the form of a novel object and tracing it through a sequence of antecedent conditions to an unprecedented idea in the mind of an agent. This backwards reading is equivalent to what anthropologist Alfred Gell has called the abduction of agency. Every work of art, for Gell, is an